There's a quiet kind of man walking among us. He doesn't shout. He doesn't seek revenge. And when someone lies to him, betrays him, or manipulates him, he doesn't explode in rage or melt in confusion. He watches, he calculates, he waits. And when the time is right, he moves, but not to destroy. He moves to protect his peace and to make sure he's never touched by that poison again. That man is not weak. He's not passive. He's stoic. You might think Stoicism is about suppressing your feelings or turning the other cheek, but the truth is, it's a philosophy built on clarity, control, and power. Not loud power, but calm, unstoppable power. And if you've ever had to deal with someone who's toxic, a manipulator, a narcissist, a gaslighter, or just a quietly cruel person, then you know what kind of strength it takes to stay grounded, to outsmart without becoming just like them. This is not about revenge. This is not about games. This is about wisdom. And if you learn it, really learn it, you won't just protect yourself from evil people. You'll make yourself immune to them, because that's what Stoicism trains. Not just how to spot darkness, but how to walk through it untouched. And it begins with one thing: seeing clearly. You see, evil people don't come into your life wearing horns. They wear masks, kindness, charm, maybe even vulnerability. They make you feel seen, chosen, admired. Then slowly, they twist the narrative. What was once praise becomes control. What felt like connection becomes obligation. And before you know it, you're doubting your own memory, your own instincts, your own worth. Marcus Aurelius said, "The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength." That calm mind isn't just about inner peace. It's your weapon. It's what lets you see the manipulation without reacting to it. It's what makes you hard to control. Because manipulators feed off emotion, your anger, your guilt, your confusion, and when you stop giving them that, you starve them. You outsmart them not with tricks, but with presence, with stillness, with self-command. And that presence, that's what Stoicism gives you. But let me tell you a story, one that might hit closer to home than you expect. A man I once knew, let's call him James, was a sharp guy, successful, kind-hearted, the type of person everyone liked to be around, until he met her. At first, she made him feel like the only man in the world, said all the right things, touched all the right wounds. She mirrored his dreams, echoed his values, and then things shifted. It started with little comments about his friends, his family, his time, about how he didn't love her enough if he set boundaries, about how he owed her more of himself. James started shrinking. He stopped laughing as much, started apologizing for things he didn't do. He was being manipulated, quietly, consistently, and he couldn't see it because he was still clinging to the version of her he fell for, not the one who was now in control. But here's the thing, pain is a brutal teacher, and when it finally broke him, that's when he found the writings of Epictetus. He read, "When someone provokes you, remember that it is not their actions that disturb you, but your judgment about them. Remove that judgment and you are safe." That changed him because it gave him his power back. He stopped explaining himself. He started observing her instead of reacting to her. He set a quiet boundary, and when she crossed it, he didn't yell. He walked away, not with hatred, but with clarity. He didn't need to win the argument. He didn't need to prove anything. He just needed to be free, and that's what he became. Isn't it strange how silence can be louder than shouting? How stillness can shake someone more than confrontation? That's the Stoic way. To become so steady that chaos loses interest in you. Because chaos needs friction to thrive. When you don't fight back the way evil people expect, you stop being a target. You become a mirror, one that forces them to see themselves, and they hate what they see. But here's what most people get wrong about Stoicism. It's not about becoming cold, it's about becoming clear. A clear man doesn't need to manipulate because he sees through manipulation. A clear man doesn't need revenge because he knows some people destroy themselves without any help. And more importantly, a clear man doesn't try to fix evil people because he knows that's not his responsibility. His responsibility is to guard his peace, to master his response, to lead himself. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you caught yourself trying to explain your worth to someone who had already decided to misunderstand you? That moment. That's when you gave them the power, and that's the moment Stoicism exists to reclaim. Because you don't need to convince evil people to be good. You need to remember that their darkness is not your reflection. There's a kind of freedom that comes when you stop needing to win arguments, when you let someone lie and you don't correct them, when you see through someone's manipulation and you don't flinch. That kind of power unnerves manipulators because they're used to control through reaction. They expect you to yell, cry, beg, fight. But when you don't, when you stay still like a mountain, suddenly they're the one exposed. A Stoic doesn't try to win by overpowering. He wins by refusing to play their game. Let me share with you something Ryan Holiday once wrote, a modern Stoic voice that echoes the ancient ones. He said, "Don't respond to provocation. Let it pass. Because when you react to fools, you become one." And that line hit me like a lightning bolt. Because isn't that what manipulators really want? They don't just want control, they want you to self-destruct. They want you to look like the unstable one so they can keep playing the victim. But what happens when you don't react? What happens when you nod, smile calmly, and keep walking? You rob them of the illusion of power. You hold on to your center. You show them that not everyone can be broken. And that realization that you are untouchable because you choose what touches you. That's not just Stoic philosophy. That's real-world power. Here's something to think about. What if your silence, your stillness, your refusal to react is the loudest boundary you could ever set? James, the man I told you about, eventually moved on. He built a new life. And she tried to circle back. That's what manipulators do. When they lose control, they test the door, hoping it's still unlocked. But he didn't even need to answer. Because when you've done the internal work, when you've rebuilt yourself from the inside out, you don't argue with your past. You simply outgrow it. Now you might be wondering, what about justice? What about consequences? Shouldn't evil people be confronted? Of course they should, but not always by you. Not at the cost of your own peace, your own energy, your own clarity. Seneca wrote, "He who does wrong to himself. The unjust man is more wretched than the victim." That's hard to accept when you've been hurt, when someone's lied to you, betrayed you, humiliated you. But over time, you begin to see the truth. You don't need to carry their poison. You don't need to become what hurt you. You just need to understand that their cruelty is a symptom of their chaos, and chaos destroys itself. You don't need to rush that. You just need to get out of the blast zone. Ask yourself, what would it feel like to finally stop trying to teach a snake to be kind and simply walk away instead? That's the Stoic way. No drama, no grand exit, just stillness and a refusal to be manipulated again. Now, let me share another story with you. This one's from a man named Eric, a former Marine turned firefighter. Stoicism wasn't a philosophy he read in books. It was a mindset he earned through fire and blood. Eric had a commanding officer once who was the very definition of evil in disguise. Always smiling, always shaking hands. But behind closed doors, he undermined people, played favorites, and set up others to fail. He nearly cost Eric his job, his reputation, and his sanity. But Eric didn't react. He documented everything. He stayed calm. When the time came, he presented the truth, not emotionally, not with rage, just facts, delivered with poise. That officer was quietly removed. Eric never gloated, never talked trash. He simply showed what happens when you meet cruelty with clarity. That's the Stoic way, not passive, not vengeful, strategic, clear, unshakable. Maybe the strongest move isn't retaliation. It's refusing to descend into the mud in the first place. And that's where most people get it wrong. They think Stoicism is weakness because it's quiet. But silence, when chosen, is a roar. They think Stoics are emotionless, but it's not that we don't feel. It's that we refuse to be ruled by those feelings. They think we avoid conflict, but it's not avoidance, it's discipline. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not respond. Not because you're afraid, but because you know the game isn't worth your soul. Evil people win when they drag you into chaos. When they turn you into a lesser version of yourself. You win when you rise above. When you stay centered while the storm rages. When you choose to be the eye of the hurricane, calm, focused, and immovable. What if the real test isn't what evil people do to you, but who you become in response? That's where the true transformation begins. There's something deeply unsettling about being manipulated, not just because of what they did to you, but because of what it made you question about yourself, your judgment, your worth, your instincts. That's why Stoicism isn't just protection, it's healing. It brings you back to your own mind, your own standards, your own center. It says, you are not crazy for feeling that something is off. You are not overreacting. You are not weak for caring. But now it's time to take back control, and control starts with clarity. One of the hardest truths to accept is this: some people lie to themselves so well that they believe the lie. And if you try to reason with them, to show them logic, facts, kindness, they'll twist all of it, because they're not seeking truth. They're seeking control. So the more you give, the more they take. The more you try to explain yourself, the more confused you become. That's why a Stoic learns to detach from the need to be understood, especially by people committed to misunderstanding him. Instead, he focuses on what's in his control, his thoughts, his actions, his boundaries, and that's not easy. Especially when the manipulator is someone close to you, a parent, a partner, a boss, even a so-called friend. You want to believe they'll change. You want to believe that if you just say the right thing in the right way, they'll finally see the damage they're doing. But let me be blunt, they won't. At least not because of you. Because change doesn't come from confrontation, it comes from collapse. And until they feel the consequences of their manipulation, until they hit a wall, they have no reason to stop. Your job is not to be that wall. Your job is to walk away before you become the collateral. So here's a brutal question. Are you staying in the fire hoping they'll stop burning you? Or are you finally ready to step into the rain? There's no glory in enduring cruelty. Stoicism doesn't tell you to sit there and suffer. It tells you to see clearly, to act decisively, to preserve your inner fortress. Because your mind is your temple, and manipulators want nothing more than to make it their playground. Don't let them. There's a quote I come back to often. Be like the cliff against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water. That's what Stoicism trains into your bones. Not numbness, not apathy, strength, unmoving, clear, free. There's a young man I once mentored. We'll call him Chris. Brilliant guy, but constantly second-guessing himself. Why? Because he grew up with a father who weaponized guilt. Every achievement, every moment of joy was met with criticism or comparison. You think that's good enough? You'll never make it unless you do it my way. If you don't do what I say, you're ungrateful. It wasn't just harsh words, it was emotional conditioning. Years of being made to feel small, selfish, and unworthy. By the time Chris was in his 20s, he couldn't make a single decision without doubting himself. And when he first came across Stoic philosophy, he thought it was too cold, too distant. But one day, he read a line from Epictetus. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. That shook him, because he realized he had spent his entire life trying to prove himself to someone who never wanted him to succeed. That's when the shift began. Chris stopped performing. He stopped explaining. He started setting boundaries, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. When his father tried to guilt-trip him again, he simply responded, "I love you, but I won't carry that weight anymore." He didn't shout. He didn't defend himself. He was calm, clear, grounded. That's when he became a man. Maybe your power doesn't come from shouting back. Maybe it comes from choosing peace, even when provoked. Because peace isn't passive. It's a decision, a boundary, a shield, a rebellion. In a world that constantly pulls you into drama, being stoic is a form of resistance. You're saying, I see the chaos, I see the manipulation, but I will not let it define me. I will not become it. I will not mirror your madness. And when you live that way, when you refuse to be baited, guilted, or shamed into reaction, something amazing happens. You become untouchable, not because life stops testing you, but because you stop surrendering your power. What if your entire life changed? Not by fighting harder, but by refusing to fight the wrong battles. There comes a point in every person's life when they must choose, react or respond. Reacting is easy. It's the impulse, the snap, the scream, the message you regret sending, the late-night overthinking, the emotional storm that leaves you drained. Responding, that's something else. That takes presence. It takes the strength to pause, to zoom out, to look at the game being played, and decide not to participate. That's what Stoic men do. Not because they don't feel anything, but because they've learned that not everything deserves a response. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is nothing. Not because you're weak, because you're finally strong enough to hold your peace. And this is where a lot of modern men get trapped, especially in a world that tells you to stand up for yourself by yelling louder, pushing harder, proving them wrong. But power isn't always visible. Power is walking away when your ego wants to stay and argue. Power is smiling when someone insults you, not because it doesn't sting, but because you refuse to let them dictate your state. Power is being so rooted in your values that no manipulation, no lie, no passive-aggressive jab can move you, because you've already made peace with yourself. You're not perfect, but you're grounded. You're not always right, but you're always clear. And that clarity, that's the edge. Evil people manipulate through confusion. They create fog, psychological fog, make you question your memory, your motives, your instincts. But a stoic man clears the fog. He sits still long enough to let the storm pass. And when it does, he sees everything for what it is, not what he wishes it was, not what he's afraid it might be, what it is. And once you see clearly, manipulation loses its grip. So ask yourself this: how much energy have you spent trying to convince someone who already decided to misunderstand you? That's the moment you pause and realize you're not obligated to explain anymore. You don't owe toxic people your story, your pain, your truth. You owe yourself peace. And yes, that might mean walking alone for a while, but it's better to walk alone in truth than be surrounded by people who twist it. Let me tell you about a woman named Morgan. She was a corporate strategist, sharp, elegant, the kind of person people naturally followed. But behind closed doors, her boss, a man she once respected, chipped away at her confidence. He'd compliment her in public, then criticize her ideas in private. He'd pretend to mentor her, only to take credit for her work. And the worst part? He always made it feel like it was her fault, like she wasn't trying hard enough, like she was too sensitive, too emotional, not resilient enough. But Morgan started keeping a journal. Every gaslight, every contradiction, every manipulation, written down, observed, detached, not with anger, but with awareness. And then one day, in a boardroom full of people, he tried to embarrass her again. Only this time, she didn't flinch. She looked him in the eye, not with rage, not with fear, with presence, with truth. And when he tried to twist the story, she calmly pulled out the receipts. Data, dates, notes, no drama, just facts. He turned red, blamed the system, tried to escape, but it was over, not because she exploded, but because she didn't, because she knew power isn't always in the punch. Sometimes it's in the pause. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. Ever wonder what would happen if you stopped trying to defend yourself and just let the truth speak for you? You know what's wild? When you finally rise above manipulation, when you no longer bite the bait, no longer explain yourself, no longer get pulled into the emotional circus, you don't just protect yourself. You inspire others. Because in a world drowning in noise, confusion, and emotional chaos, your stillness becomes magnetic. People start noticing that you don't react like everyone else. You're not flustered by gossip. You're not baited by ego games. You don't chase validation. You stand in your own authority. And suddenly, the manipulators, they look smaller, weaker, desperate, because next to a grounded man, chaos has no place to hide. That's the power of Stoicism, not just a philosophy, a force, a way of seeing the world and yourself with precision, a way of reclaiming your attention, your time, your emotional bandwidth, a way of saying, you don't get to live rent-free in my head anymore. Because that's what evil people really want. Not your body, not your money, not even your affection. They want your mind. They want to control how you see yourself. But once you reclaim that, once you sit in the driver's seat of your own inner world, they lose everything. And you become unshakable. Because you've realized something most people never do. Evil doesn't need to be fought with fire. Sometimes it just needs to be ignored long enough to burn itself out. And that's when the real transformation begins. When you no longer need to win, when you no longer need to prove, when you finally trust that the truth, calmly held, clearly lived, will outlast every lie thrown against it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." That's it. That's the game. Be the man who can't be manipulated because he doesn't need approval. Be the man who can't be controlled because he controls himself. Be the man who doesn't need revenge, because walking away in peace is the greatest punishment of all. And look, I get it. This isn't easy. If it were, the world would be filled with Stoics, not broken men lashing out in pain. But this path, this ancient path, it's still here, and it's waiting for you. Because no matter how deep the manipulation, how heavy the betrayal, how cold the cruelty, your mind is still yours. Your peace is still yours. Your response is still yours. And when you master those things, you don't just outsmart evil people. You outgrow them, and they can't follow you where you're going. So now the question becomes, will you keep dancing with darkness? Or will you become the man who stands so firmly in the light that shadows can no longer touch you? If this message found you in a moment of struggle, if you felt the sting of manipulation or the quiet ache of betrayal, then maybe this wasn't just a video. Maybe it was a reminder that you're stronger than you think, that you don't need to fight louder, you just need to stand clearer. And if Stoic philosophy is helping you build that clarity, that peace, that unshakable presence, then stay with us, because this is just the beginning. Subscribe, join the tribe, and walk with those who don't flinch when the world gets dark. We're here, and we're moving forward, with calm, with clarity, with fire in our soul, and ice in our veins.